Here we have a 2006 Mercedes CLK 350, little 3.5 liter six-cylinder. I think it's the 272 motor, been in production for a number of years. I think they quit making it a few years ago. We're getting a P0128 code, which tells us that the coolant temperature isn't up to speed. So after a little diagnosis, we pulled the top engine cover, or the front engine cover, that's right there. And we used a digital thermometer and we pointed it right at the engine where the thermostat is. And sure enough, it's running about 60 degrees Celsius instead of 80. So given the ambient temperature here, probably the thermostat's stuck open. So we've ordered a new thermostat and coolant online, should be here later today. So what we're going to do is try and take this apart and get it ready for the replacement. Part of the challenge here is we don't have a floor jack or ramps, so draining the coolant, what I'm going to try and do is suck it out through one of these hoses here with a cheapy pump, manual pump from Harbor Freight, I think. To do this job, we're going to need to take this air pump out of the way. So we're going to need some Torx males, and then the bolts looks like this one here. It's the Torx socket. Now that's not the bolt we're removing. They're the bolts that retain the thermostat housing. So this air pump's going to have to come off. Obviously the serpentine belt, possibly this idler pulley, and the housing itself. Down here, the lower radiator hose has these fittings coming up here, and this is where we're going to try and splice in and use a pump and pump out the antifreeze. The car has 77,000 miles on it, so that wouldn't be enough to replace the antifreeze ordinarily, but it is past just a year or so past the 15-year recommended intervals, so we'll replace that with Mercedes-Benz coolant. So saving the coolant isn't paramount. I mean, worst case, we could just pop the top radiator hose and drain it on the floor, but I'm going to try and use these hoses up here in a hand pump to avoid that mess. Aside from limitations of jacks, jack stands, or ramps, we're also working with a limited set of tools here. So here we're going to use our Torx driver bits, and we're going to use a 1/4-inch socket to hold them. And then we have these Torx sockets, which are an absolute must. Then we have some adapters here, so we can use the ratchet with the smaller drive, 1/4-inch drive sockets to cover the Torx. So whether everything works or not, we'll have to see. Maybe I end up having to buy a set of Torx sockets. We have a breaker bar there too, which with one of these adapters, we should be able to get loose anything that's too stubborn. Here's our pump, hoses, and attachments that we're going to try and use to suck the antifreeze out of the top. We also have a couple of bottles here. I think there's about 1.5 gallons, 5 liters capacity, so 2-gallon bottles ought to do it. So we've managed to suck the fluid out of the reservoir, which is right there, and then pulled this hose here and caught the drippings in that little catch pan there. And now we're about to see if we can't snake the hose, the inlet hose for the pump, down into there, down into the lower radiator hose, and really pull out some large quantities of coolant. So we tried getting the red hose, the fat red hose down here, and even straightening this out, we really couldn't get it past this this intersection here with the lower radiator hose. So we used this skinny hose. I think it's designed to go down a dipstick tube to suck oil out. And so far we've gotten close to 1/2 gallon, maybe a little more in this jug. This jug over here is what we got out of the reservoir during the first part. We're looking at about 5 liters to gather, which would be about 1.3 gallons. So we'll see how we make out. Let's continue. We've yielded about 1.5 gallons of antifreeze. I was expecting to get less than that. I suspect maybe there's an overage in the reservoir. So in that case, we may have to reuse some of the older antifreeze because I think I only have a gallon coming. We'll know a little later today when the delivery arrives. It's important to clean out our gear, so we use a bucket of clean water and we pump out through all 3 hoses that we've used to get the pump clean for our next use. Who knows what that'll be. Next, we're going to take off the serpentine belt. It's important to make a diagram or take a picture of the routing of this so we can redo it. Apparently, we use this hex head down here to put a breaker bar on to release the tension. So that's what we're going to do next after our diagram and photo. We've also reinstalled the hose where we drain the fluid. That's right here. Just a simple clip with a clamp with the pliers. So we've got our pump loose. We ended up having to solve some bit loss with a piece of retention tape on here. But after we conquered that, we got the 5 bolts out. Last sticking point is this final hose here. So we'll just shoot a little go juice on there, which should loosen and soften things up a bit. And hopefully that'll spin right off for us. With our go juice conservatively applied, we managed to get our pump off, and now we're down to the neck itself and the radiator hose. Let's see if we can't get this radiator hose off without too much hassle. We pull this clip right here, and we'll remove that all the way. I think we get a new clip with the new neck. There we go. To the parts can. And now this should come out maybe with a teeny bit of coaxing. Let's try a little more go juice. Just a smidge. There we go. And there we go. It's coming loose a little bit. I want to be careful with this radiator hose because this is an expensive part if we screw it up. Let that soak in for a minute. There we go. All right, nice and clear. Let's clean this off. Nice O-ring seal there. So ostensibly the thermostat is stuck open. However, there is a little bit of antifreeze sitting there that suggests maybe it snapped closed with all the wrestling we've been doing here. So we'll try and soak that extra antifreeze out of there so we don't make too big of a mess. So there's a little clip on the bottom of the thermostat housing for this electrical connector, and I honestly can't see how that is undone. So what I'm probably going to do is pop off this retainer that the wire is zip tied to, and we'll remove the thermostat and rotate it up so we can see how to unclip that wire without breaking the clip. For these bolts, we need a Torx socket, an E10. E's probably for external in my layman's understanding of things. Let's give this a try. See if we can crack this one open. Oh good, that cracks loose fairly easily. Let's see if we can get on the bottom one. And it looks like this pulley's in the way. Can't get to it with an open end, because who's ever heard of an open end Torx? So let's take the idler pulley out of the way. Always something, isn't there? Fortunately, this is also an E10. Nice of them to have this engine cover as our tool rest. There we go. Looks like there might be a little bit of anti-seize on there, or Loctite, so maybe we'll have to buy some of that as we do our reassembly. Now on to our lower bolt. I end up with 2 ratchets. I don't know. Okay, let's take this lower one out. That will allow us to use the upper one to hold everything in until we're ready to catch it. I will get some more rags to catch any antifreeze coming out. We don't want to saturate our belt and pulleys with antifreeze if we can help it. Must be a long fellow. There we go. Be right back. Got a fresh wad of antifreeze catchers right here. Put them in place. Good reuse of lightly used paper towels. All right, let's see if we can't get this neck out of here. Don't turn easily. Not stripping, so that's good. But there we go. Home at last. Here we go. All right. Let's see. Of course, that won't come loose. We're going to get a block of wood and a hammer and tap that loose. Once again, working with limited resources, no rubber hammer or equivalent. So let's see what we can do. Seems like it wanted to budge. Yep. Seems like it. Don't know if we can hit up on it. No, that's not going to be feasible. Maybe off to the side a little. Let's see what we can do. There we go. Seems like she wants to come free. There we go. And the reason we're hanging up, there's a rubber seal right there, and there's a little bit of extra antifreeze coming out. Well, that doesn't look like too bad of a component. In fact, it's well, no, it's open right now. Anyway, yeah, it seems pretty stuck. So I think we're wise in replacing that. Let's see what the holdup is here with this clip. I don't know if I pull up on that. Well, have to study that a bit. So what I did for this clip, I got the tiniest of screwdrivers and I pried this up in order to raise this gray portion of the clip, and then came inside and pried that up from the thermostat housing, or prying against the thermostat housing once I had it rotated that I could see. I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to blindly get that, so I'll leave that to greater minds than mine. But we got it off without a hitch. The last thing to do then is clean up the edge of the housing here for the thermostat, new thermostat to seat nicely upon. And of course, we got to wait for the UPS driver to bring us our new parts. So there's a little bit of gasket material stuck around here where the thermostat rests. So what we did is we used a putty knife like this to scrape gently, that and a fingernail. I never push forward with a putty knife on aluminum. You could gouge it. I'm always hesitant to use a razor blade on aluminum for a similar reason, especially in an area like this where it's tough to see the plane, get a nice clear approach to it. So putty knife worked pretty good to get off the spare black, and I think I'll follow up with a little bit of Scotch-Brite. Scotch-Brite comes in various grades. Green and red are most typical. They're usually fairly abrasive. I forget which is more harsh, more coarse. Of course, there's like a dark gray or black one as well. I think the blue is about the lightest. Of course, Scotch-Brite pads will cost you a good $3 or $4 for a small pack. Here, we have some Scotch-Brite for about $2, and they have multiple uses otherwise. Let's see how we make out. So using the Scotch-Brite side of this sponge, we were able to clean up the edges quite nicely. While there's a little dark that still appears, I can't feel any sort of ridge with my fingernail, so I think we're good to seal with the factory gasket rather than needing any additional sealing compounds. Also scrubbed in here around this ring, this is where the gasket on the thermostat, there's obviously the outer gasket, but there's an O-ring type gasket here on the body of the thermostat that needs to seal on there. There was a little bit of black gunk probably from the former O-ring, so everything's looking clean and shiny now. We're getting close to reassembly. So our parts arrived yesterday. We have the thermostat. It's labeled as Borg Warner, but I believe it's a wall, which is what we took out. We got a couple struts to support the hood. The old ones are failing in cold weather. We'll talk about that later. And we got a gallon of the Mercedes compatible blue antifreeze. It has the same corrosion protection as the manufacturer's antifreeze. And this is a German brand, and according to the internet, we need to mix it 50-50 with distilled water as opposed to tap water or deionized water. So here's the thermostat. Well, the box does say Borg Warner. The thermostat says Waller, and when we compare it to the one that has a Mercedes logo on it, it's also a Waller unit. So FCP Euro was the vendor where I bought this cooling or thermostat replacement kit, which included the antifreeze, and it came within a couple of days. Pretty easy and painless. We'll see how well it goes. Here's the gasket too that comes with the new thermostat. So as we prepare for reassembly, we need to figure out what to do with the bolts and any coatings and such. So we're gonna take this Allen wrench and stick it in the mounting holes and make sure that that's a blind hole and doesn't go into a water jet. Now we're gonna work on putting our thermostat in, our new thermostat. So first we're gonna put a little bit of antifreeze on this O-ring just to ease it sliding in. Secondly, we're gonna double check that this this coupler looks like it's gonna fit. Yeah, so that connector should fit nicely. So let's get this guy in there. Okay, the other thing we're gonna do, we're gonna take the mounting bolts and we're gonna put some grease on there. Usually I use white lithium grease, but down here with limited resources, I only have axle grease, trailer bearing axle grease. So we'll use that instead. And the point here is to ease disassembly in the future. The steel fasteners in the aluminum can tend to seize up or firm up over the years. In my experience working with older Japanese vehicles, broken bolts due to corrosion is a real issue. So trying to avoid that here. See if we can find that bottom mounting hole. There we go. Of course, working with aluminum cross-threading is always a concern. So do everything you can to get your fasteners started straight. I like to start them by hand because I can sort of feel when they catch, which isn't the case just yet. There we go. That's seated nicely. So let's spin it in by hand. And of course, we just want to get them loosely cinched down. Whenever there's a surface-to-surface mounting, you want to try and tighten things up evenly. Obviously, if there's a head gasket or something like that, a cylinder head at play, then there's a certain tightening sequence. Not the case here. I think the sequence is simply bring them down evenly. See how we're making out here. So we've got them snug down. Question is, how tight do they go? I'm sure there's a torque spec on these. I, of course, don't have a torque wrench. Once you've worked on enough things, you have a feel for what's tight enough, and what's too tight. So I would venture to say these are tight enough, based in part how hard they seem to come out as we were disassembling. So let's connect our radiator hose. Similarly, we give that a little bit of dip in antifreeze to try and get it to seat nicely. And let's see. There we go. All right. And let's reinstall our clip. Remember the clip, don't know if that's still in the framework there. Let's see here. The clip actually catches on there. That's the retaining clip. So let's get the electrical connection cinched up. There we go. And then snug that down there, and we're good to go. Now let's try and reinstall the air pump. One thing with the air pump, we have these two plastic vacuum lines that go between the cylinder head and the air pump bracket. So, in fact, it looks like they kind of sneak behind the air pump bracket. So we want to be extra careful that we don't pinch those off or otherwise impinge upon them. So let's try and do this in reverse order of disassembly here. I think we had disconnected that hose or removed that hose after we had removed the pump itself. There's also the electrical connection on the back here, which goes over here. So let's see what we can do. Making me wish I made a diagram of this before I took it out. Yeah, there's those vacuum lines in the way. There we go. Vacuum lines are safely in place so far. Although this does have to go down quite a bit farther in order to seat properly. There we go. We're getting a little closer. Let's get some of these connected as we go. There we go. I can see the bolt holes are starting to line up. There we go there. And let's get the wire on while we have good access. And finally, let's get this last hose in place. There's a nice arrow there. I guess that's for the logic impaired, like myself. All right, let's see. Okay, that one looks like it's going to be easy to connect later, so we'll leave that out so we can get this on better ourselves. So we have some long bolts and short bolts. The long bolts attach the fan to the pump to the housing. The brackets to the the brackets on the housing here to the brackets on the engine, and the shorter bolts attached to this light bracket here just to help hold that trim in place. It helps support the engine cover and these wires and vacuum connectors. So like before, we're going to grease these up to ease their subsequent deinstallation, maybe by a future owner, maybe by someone in the junkyard. You just don't know. When tightening many things like this, you don't want to snug anything down right away. You want to put things in loosely so you got the wiggle room to firm everything up when you have more than one, or especially when you have more than one or two points of mounting. So while we're turning these in by hand, we can't reach them by hand, so I am using the tool to spin them in by hand without the aid of a wrench, just to get the feel for the threads, make sure nothing's cross-threaded. So this is the third mounting bolt on the housing, and we have two more mounting bolts on this little bracket here, and that should finish us up. One point here, everything on this Mercedes seems to be Torx, either external Torx or straight Torx. So I guess while that's cumbersome in and of itself, the proverbial lost 10 millimeter doesn't apply here. So maybe that's a win overall. Just don't know. Time to grease and seat the last two of our bolts and get on with our installation. One complicating factor here when reinstalling the air pump, let me focus back out here. So here's the air pump. There are these two vacuum lines down here, and you can see they move freely. There's a groove in the bracket, the air pump bracket, where that has clearance for these lines. Otherwise, if you just install the pump where the lines fall, they end up getting pinched up against the block or cylinder head, which is no good. Ask me how I know. Next, we get to put our serpentine belt in place. We got to replace the pulley right here, and then of course look at our picture and snake the belt back into position and put it on the tensioner. So we've used this spare bottle, and we've come up with a 50-50 mixture of distilled water and antifreeze. And the instructions on the thermostat tell you, aside from the obvious things of cleaning and connecting, fill up coolant with engine running. What I think we're going to do is put a little in first, just to get it up close to the water pump, and then we'll get it running and begin topping it off from there. So we started off putting in about a half gallon. When we started the engine got noticeably quieter as the level went up. Right now we have a fairly full reservoir. We've put in about a gallon and a half, and it looks like we've taken out almost 2 gallons, at least 1.5, maybe 1 3/4 at a minimum. So I think once it comes up to temp and the system burps, I think we're going to be able to top it off. Right now the upper radiator hose is soft, so the thermostat hasn't opened yet. Let's check our running temperature. Okay, temp gauge is showing just about 60 degrees Celsius. We need to get it up to about 80, and then we'll up to operating temperature. We've got our engine cover back on. We did a run to the auto store to borrow the code reader, reset the low coolant temp ODB code, and we realized that it's running about 80 to 90 degrees centigrade. So I think the proper operating range is about 87. In any case, it did suck down a little bit of coolant, so we've topped it up to here. All in all, we've used about 1 3/4 gallons of fluid coolant, 50-50 mix, and I think we're good to go. Thanks for watching.